Millionaire surprised his employee while she was nursing her child and fell in love. The rain hadn't stopped yet. It fell fine and persistent against the mansion's windows that had been converted into corporate headquarters, and it was barely 6:30 in the morning. At that hour, no one was usually there. No one, except him. Nathan walked silently down the marble hallway with a cup of black coffee in his hand and his brow slightly furrowed. It wasn't a gesture of annoyance, but of habit. No one at the company knew any other version of his face, always serious, impassive, distant. He was the type of man you didn't raise your voice to, whom everyone listened to without arguing back. The millionaire who had built his empire without anyone's help, guided by relentless logic. Don't get attached to anything or anyone. But that morning, the universe seemed to conspire against his own rules. The break room door was slightly ajar, just an angle, enough for a warm breeze and a soft murmur to stop him as he passed. He was going to ignore it, as he always did with everything that wasn't part of his agenda. But something, an absurd hunch, an unknown impulse forced him to push it gently. And then he saw her. She was there, with her back to the fogged window, sitting in one of the worn armchairs that almost no one used. In her arms, she cradled a small baby who was feeding silently, sheltered by a sand-colored blanket. Her dark hair fell messily over her shoulders, and although her eyes were closed, her expression was one of serene exhaustion, as if in that instant, the world had stopped just to protect that moment. Nathan didn't know her name. He knew she worked in the cleaning department, that she came and went without making noise, like a discreet shadow among the expensive suits and polished leather shoes. He had never spoken a word to her. He hadn't even noticed her face before now. But in that second, in that deeply intimate and human scene, something in him cracked. He wanted to speak, to tell her he was sorry, that it wasn't his intention to intrude. But he couldn't. His lips remained sealed as if something invisible tied him to the floor. Emma, because that was her name, he would hear it later, slowly opened her eyes, as if sensing a presence, and their gazes met. And although neither of them said a word, both understood everything, she who was on the edge of fear, and he who was on the edge of a revelation he couldn't name. There was no anger in her eyes, no shame either. There was something more powerful, an unbreakable dignity, even in her vulnerability, a strength that didn't come from pride, but from love. Nathan looked down. He took a step back. He closed the door, but the impact of that image would follow him all day, all week, all his life. That instant sealed a destiny, hers, his, the child's, because sometimes what changes everything makes no sound. If this story has already touched something in you, subscribe so you don't miss what's coming. Emma hadn't been born to be noticed. At least that's what the years had taught her. She learned that the less noise she made, the safer she would be, that the less space she took up, the less she would bother, that a single woman with a baby in tow had no place in a world that demanded efficiency, neatness, and invisibility. Every morning, before the clock struck 5, she left the small room she rented at the end of a nameless street, carrying an old bag, a blanket, and her son Jake wrapped against her chest. Walking to the bus station took her 20 minutes. The journey was dark and freezing, and yet, Emma was grateful, because at least she had work. Sterling Capital was another galaxy. High ceilings, polished marble, imported coffee, managers dressed in silk and conversations spoken with half smiles. There Emma became just another shadow. Her job was to clean what others dirtied, pick up what others left behind, and disappear before anyone asked her name. No one cared if she had a fever, if she had eaten, if she had cried the night before. No one asked about Jake. That was better that way, she thought. Better that they didn't know, because if they knew, they could take everything away. Emma had made a pact with desperation. Hiding her son was surviving. She carried him with her, sleeping inside the padded bag that pretended to be just clothes. When he cried, she ran to the most remote bathroom. When he woke up, she cradled him in a corner without cameras, where no one could see them. That corner, that armchair in the break room, had been her only refuge that rainy morning. Jake was hungry, and she couldn't deny him, even if it meant risking everything. When she opened her eyes and saw him there, the man in grey suits, the supreme boss, the untouchable Nathan, her world collapsed in a second. She expected immediate dismissal. She expected public humiliation. She expected them to call security. But none of that happened. Just a long look, too long not to mean something, and then the silence of the door closing softly. Emma didn't understand what had happened, and that was the most terrifying part. The following hours were a constant knot in her throat. She looked over her shoulder, listened for footsteps that didn't come, feared every sound of the elevator. But nothing happened. No one called her. No one asked for explanations. No one took away her access card. It was as if that moment had never existed. But it did exist. She knew because, at the end of the day, while sweeping the hallways of the upper floor, she passed by the glass and steel office where she had never dared to look. And for the first time, he was watching her. Nathan, from the other side of the glass, standing, with his hands in his pockets, and his eyes fixed on her. There was no hardness in his expression, just something different, as if he were truly seeing her, as if for the first time, Emma stopped being invisible, and that somehow was more frightening than being fired. Nathan didn't believe in coincidences. He believed in effort, in discipline, in numbers and strategy. His life was a succession of calculated decisions. Every step, every investment, every word, everything had to have a clear purpose. And yet, since that morning, something had slipped through the cracks of his logic, like warm water spilling in a frozen room. He tried to continue as always, meetings, signatures, calls with investors, but something didn't fit. The image of that woman, the employee no one named, with the child in her arms wouldn't leave him. It was like an echo, a flash he couldn't turn off. Why had it moved him so much? It wasn't motherhood. It wasn't the scene itself. It was her look. There was an unbreakable calm in her face, even while defying everything that could cost her her job. An absolute surrender, a sweetness he didn't know, because Nathan had grown up without that, without a mother, without arms to hold him, raised by a woman hard as iron, a grandmother who fed him but never hugged him, who educated him but never caressed his forehead. His father, a name without a face, an abandonment he never knew how to explain. By 9 he had already learned to hide tears. By 13, he already understood that loving was weakness. By 16, he had sworn he would never depend on anyone. Money was his shield, power, his language. He had bought houses, companies, silences. He had built an impeccable reputation, an unbreakable personal brand. Everyone admired him, feared him, respected him, but no one knew him. And that's why what he felt that morning seemed so strange to him. It was a crack in his structure, a pause in his armor. Seeing Emma with her son was like looking at something he had never had, and that perhaps he never would. It wasn't lust, it wasn't desire, it was something deeper, a longing he couldn't put into words, something that made him uncomfortable, that made him human, and that was dangerous. That night, when he returned to his silent penthouse, he walked among the cold walls as if something was missing. No one was waiting for him. No one asked how he was. No one laughed when they saw him enter. The city glittered down below, and he, at the top, felt lonelier than ever. He opened a bottle of wine he didn't want. He turned on the television he didn't want to watch. And finally he looked at his reflection in the glass. Who was this man who had stood in front of an employee as if she disarmed him just by existing? And why? Wouldn't that question let him sleep? Emma felt that something had changed. She couldn't explain it, but she knew it. In the days following that morning, the hallways no longer seemed so neutral. The lights were no longer just lights, and the silence was no longer silence. Nathan began to appear in places where she had never seen him before. It wasn't coincidence. It couldn't be. Always at a prudent distance. Always with that inscrutable face, as if he was just passing by. But he passed by too often, and his eyes, those gray and sharp eyes, lingered for an instant longer than normal, just to see her. Emma avoided his gaze. She walked faster. She pretended not to notice, but inside her heart pounded in her chest as if something was brewing, and she didn't know how to stop it. One morning, while organizing the filing cabinets on the ground floor, she felt him behind her. The sound of his steps was different from the others, firmer, slower, the kind of steps one doesn't forget. And when she turned her face slightly, there he was, Nathan, watching her silently from the doorframe. He didn't say anything. He didn't smile. He just nodded slightly with his head, as if that gesture was enough to validate his presence. Then, he left. Emma rested her forehead against the cabinet. She felt she was on the edge of something, but of what? She didn't know if he was doing it out of guilt, curiosity, or something else, and that worried her, because in her life there was no room for games. She couldn't afford to get distracted, much less to get her hopes up. She had a son who depended on her, rent to pay, and a job that, although silent, was her only safety net. And yet, why did her body react like that when he was near? Meanwhile, in the upper offices, rumors began to seep like drops of oil. The assistants spoke in low voices, the secretaries exchanged glances. Nothing concrete, nothing obvious, but everyone was beginning to notice that something was floating in the air. Nathan knew it. He felt the looks, the whispers, and still, he didn't stop. There was something about her that disarmed him without meaning to. It wasn't her appearance, it wasn't her voice, it was her way of existing, her way of holding the child without complaining, of cleaning the same corner every day, as if it were a sacred ritual, of going unnoticed, and at the same time, filling the spaces. She was the opposite of everything he knew, and perhaps for that very reason, he couldn't stay away. Have you ever felt that someone saw you when no one else did? Tell us in the comments. In the next block, Nathan begins to approach more directly, and the desire to understand Emma mixes with an internal confusion he can't control. The tension grows, not just between them, but within himself. Nathan had been fighting against an unknown impulse for days, an impulse that had no name in his plans, that didn't fit in his agendas or strategies. It wasn't about carnal desire or simple intrigue. It was a strange need to know who she was. Emma, now he knew her name. He had seen it in the internal employee system. He had read her file with absurd concentration. Emma Martinez, 28 years old, night shift, no registered family members, one undeclared minor child. That last part hurt him more than he expected. Why did she have to hide him? Why did someone like her have to live in fear? Nathan, for the first time in years, doubted the rules he himself had created. One Thursday he had her called. Not to his office, not formally, not with witnesses, just a note, handwritten, left in her locker with his signature at the end. "Can we talk, Nathan?" Emma felt the paper burn her fingers. She spent the entire afternoon debating between fear, suspicion, and a hint of anxiety. She couldn't understand why that man, that millionaire with the impenetrable gaze, would want to talk to her. She thought about ignoring it, but something in her chest told her she could no longer keep hiding. At 6, when she finished her shift, she headed to the small interior garden of the company. There she found him, waiting, without escorts or phones, sitting on a stone bench as if the world wasn't spinning. "Thank you for coming," he said, without beating around the bush. She just nodded, keeping her distance. "I wanted to apologize," he continued. "I shouldn't have seen you that day. It was an invasion, but I couldn't help it." Emma didn't respond. She didn't know what she was supposed to say. "Thank you. It's okay. Why have you been watching me since then?" Nathan noticed her discomfort and looked away. He seemed vulnerable. For an instant, he stopped being the man everyone feared. "You don't have to explain anything to me. I just wanted you to know that you're not alone," he added, almost in a whisper. She felt a knot in her throat. She wasn't used to anyone caring, much less someone like him. "I have to go," she murmured. "Of course," he replied, standing up. "But if you ever need anything, just tell me." There were no smiles, no promises, just that dense silence between two people who don't know each other, but who have already begun to affect each other without meaning to. Emma walked away with a firm step, but inside she was trembling. And Nathan stayed there, watching her silhouette disappear among the shadows, knowing he had crossed a line from which he could never return. In the next block, Nathan tries to offer Emma practical help, but she interprets it as a disguised threat. The conflict begins to emerge between distrust and the desire to get closer. Nathan had never been subtle. He didn't know how to be. He had spent his entire life solving everything with concrete, quick, silent actions. When something didn't work, he bought it. When something threatened his control, he restructured it. The world had molded to his will because he pushed it with force. But with Emma, none of that seemed to work. After their brief encounter in the garden, something inside him kept beating, a kind of urgency. He wanted to protect her. He didn't know from what or why, but he felt it, and the only thing he knew was the language of solutions. So without consulting her, he promoted her. He moved her contract to permanent staff, assigned her a new uniform, and relocated her to a minor administrative section without cleaning duties. A huge gesture, but without dialogue. When Emma received the notice through internal mail, she felt the ground open beneath her feet. A promotion. Why? What for? The answer came to her a few hours later, when she saw him pass by, and their eyes met. He lowered his head, almost shyly, as if he expected gratitude, but she didn't give it to him. That afternoon she knocked on his office door for the first time. Nathan looked up, surprised. Emma was there, upright, with tight lips and trembling hands. It wasn't anger she brought, it was dignity. "I can't accept this," she said, with a firm voice. "Why not?" "Because I didn't ask for it, and because I don't know what it means." Nathan remained silent. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. "It doesn't mean anything hidden," he finally answered. "I just thought you deserved it. I don't need favors, I need respect." Those words hit him harder than any accusation, because she was right. He had acted as he always did, deciding for others. Even if his intentions were different, he had crossed a line without asking. "I didn't mean to offend you," he murmured. "I'm learning, with you." Emma looked at him steadily, and for the first time, she noticed something different in his eyes, something human, but no less dangerous for that. "I'm learning too, Nathan, not to trust so quickly again." And without waiting for an answer, she left. He was left alone, with a blank sheet of paper in front of him, and his hands open on the desk. Inside, discomfort pierced him like a broken mirror, because it was the first time his power wasn't enough. Because with her, the rules no longer worked, and because without meaning to, he had begun to need her. It didn't take long for word to spread. The cleaning employee promoted without going through human resources. The quiet girl who now carried folders and walked through offices where she had only entered before to collect trash. The same one who, some said, had been seen talking to the boss. The looks were no longer neutral. The words, although disguised as courtesy, carried poison at their edges. Smiles that weren't smiles, congratulations that hurt more than insults. And in the middle of it all, Emma, she tried to continue. Get up, complete her shift, complete her tasks. But the atmosphere had become thick. Breathing was difficult, and looking at Nathan, even from a distance, was worse, because she didn't know who was judging her more, the others or him. It didn't take long for someone to cast the first stone. Rebecca, supervisor of the maintenance area, was one of the few who had worked at Sterling Capital since the beginning. She moved with an air of ownership, as if every corner of marble belonged to her, and when she learned of Emma's change, her gesture was clear. This couldn't go unpunished. Small humiliations began to appear. Doubled shifts that no one explained. Contradictory orders. Papers that disappeared. One day someone even left an anonymous note in her locker. "Don't get confused. You're not one of us." Emma didn't cry, but that night when she got home and saw Jake sleeping, she felt an indescribable weight in her chest. Was it worth it? She wondered. Being seen, stopping being invisible, to become a target. Nathan, meanwhile, observed everything from his glass tower. He wasn't stupid. He knew the language of intrigue. He knew something was happening, and he would confirm it one afternoon when he heard Rebecca talking in a low voice with another supervisor in front of the elevator. "What if we file a formal complaint? She'll surely back down." That was the limit. The next day, without making noise, Nathan transferred her to another company location. He gave no explanations. He just signed the document, and although no one said it out loud, everyone understood the message. Don't touch Emma. She, however, found out through third parties, and far from feeling protected, she felt exposed, even more, controlled. The idea that Nathan was watching her weighed on her. Was it protection, or was it a form of disguised control? But there was something that disarmed her. One gray afternoon, while collecting documents in the South Sector, she saw him leave the building and walk aimlessly. She followed him with her gaze. It wasn't his car or a driver. He was alone, dressed discreetly, with his hands in his pockets. And a few minutes later, he stopped in front of a place she knew well, the community center where she left Jake when she could pay for the day. He entered, not with arrogance, not as a boss, just as a curious man who seemed out of place, and yet strangely present. Emma watched him from afar, and for the first time, she didn't know if she should run or approach. In the next block, Nathan and Emma meet in the rain in a scene charged with emotional tension. An unexpected kiss breaks the surface, but instead of bringing them closer, it opens a new rift between fear and desire. The rain returned like an old broken promise. That Thursday, the sky over Chicago was covered with thick clouds, and the streets were soaked as if something up there also needed to cry. Emma left work late, with her backpack hanging from her shoulder and a coat too thin for the cold that the wind brought. Jake was at Mrs. Rodriguez's house, a neighbor who sometimes did her the favor of watching him when the shift ran long. Emma walked hurriedly, dodging puddles with her mind clouded by worries. The salary still hadn't been deposited. The food in the fridge was running out, and now there was also Nathan. It was too much. Too many sensations she didn't know where to place. When she crossed the company's back parking lot, she saw a familiar silhouette standing under the awning. Him. Nathan was there, alone, with his coat soaked and his hair darkened by the rain. He seemed lost, as if he were waiting for something he couldn't even name. Emma tried to pass by directly, but he saw her, and took 2 steps in her direction. "You're soaked," he murmured. "I'm fine, I can give you a ride. It's not necessary." The silence fell between them like a silent thunder. Both knew that something had been circling them for days, something they could no longer pretend about. "It wasn't my intention to hurt you," he said. "Finally, I just wanted to help you. I didn't ask for help." "I know." Emma looked at him with bright eyes. She was tired of resisting, but even more tired of being misunderstood. And at the same time, there was something about him, something that hurt. "You don't understand what it's like to live with fear," she said. "Fear of losing the little you have, that someone comes in, looks at you, and takes it away." Nathan took another step. There were barely centimeters between them. The rain fell on them like a heavy curtain, but neither moved. "I don't want to take anything from you," he whispered, and then it happened. It was an impulse, a clumsy and urgent gesture. Nathan leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a kiss of conquest or certainty. It was a tense, contained touch, as if both were looking for a way out of their own storm in the other. Emma didn't respond. It took barely 2 seconds for her to pull away, her eyes wide, hurt, incredulous. "Don't do that," she said, with a trembling voice. "You don't know what you're doing." He didn't insist, he just lowered his head. She left without looking back. Her step was firm, but inside everything was falling apart. And Nathan stayed there, under the rain, as if he finally understood that he had crossed a line from which he couldn't return. Because sometimes, even the most sincere desire arrives at the wrong time. She didn't return the next day, or the next. Emma didn't ask for explanations. She didn't write a formal letter either. She just left her uniform clean, carefully folded inside a transparent bag, and a brief note in the supervisor's locker. "Thank you for the opportunity. I won't be back." She didn't mention Nathan. She didn't mention the kiss. She left no room for dialogue. She simply disappeared. When Nathan found out, his first impulse was to go look for her, ask her to come back, tell her it wasn't what it seemed, that it wasn't a game, that he himself didn't know what he was feeling, but that he couldn't let her leave like that. But he didn't do it. He stayed still, sitting in front of his desk, looking out the window at the city he had always controlled like a perfect chess game. Now, every tower, every street, every building seemed empty, as if everything lost meaning without her. For days the office became quieter than ever, not because no one spoke, but because he no longer heard anything. He locked himself in his office. He delegated decisions, he rejected meetings, and every time he thought of her, he felt a strange deep hole difficult to name. What hurt him most wasn't her departure, it was the way she had left, without claiming anything, without asking for explanations, with the same silent dignity with which she had always lived. Nathan had hurt her, and he didn't even know how to fix it. 3 weeks passed. One afternoon, returning to his apartment, he found a letter under his door. It had no return address, no signature on the front, but he recognized the handwriting as soon as he saw it. He opened it with trembling hands. "I don't know why I'm writing to you. Maybe because I needed to close something that never began. I don't want you to think I left out of hatred. I left because you reminded me of things I had buried. Because you looked at me in a way that made me feel visible. And that, Nathan, is scary when one has lived hiding. Thank you for the good. Thank you for the bad too. Take care. There was no signature, no return address, just that brief, bitter, honest goodbye. Nathan sat on the floor. He didn't cry, but something inside him broke. Not like a violent blow, but like a whisper that told him, and now what? For the first time he missed something money couldn't buy. A look, a shared silence, a boy sleeping in his mother's arms. If this moment hurt you like it hurt him, leave your like so more people can feel this story. And then he understood. It was no longer about an employee or a mistake. It was about her, about what she awakened in him, about what could be, if he had the courage to face his own emptiness. The next day, Nathan didn't go to work. He went to look for her. It wasn't difficult to find her. Nathan knew the ways. He could pull invisible strings with a single call. But this time he didn't use his influence to control, but to get closer. He didn't want to invade. He just needed to see her. He felt that if he didn't try, he would regret it his whole life. The address he received led him to the outskirts of Chicago, to an old building with cracked walls, rusty bars, and narrow stairs with worn steps. The graffiti at the entrance and the smell of humidity were signs of a reality very different from his own. But he didn't stop. He didn't bring a driver. He wasn't wearing a suit. He went alone, in sober jeans and a dark coat. He carried in his hand a small box wrapped in craft paper. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't flashy. Inside there was something that couldn't be bought. He climbed the steps slowly to the second floor. In front of door 2B, he stood motionless for a few seconds. He breathed deeply. His heart beat with unknown anxiety. And then he knocked softly. He waited. He knocked again, a little harder. When he thought no one would answer, the door opened just a crack. Through the gap appeared a pair of large and curious eyes. Jake. Nathan recognized him immediately. Although he had only seen him sleeping in Emma's arms, something in his little face seemed familiar. A clean innocence. A light that completely disarmed him. "Nathan," said a voice from the back. "Emma?" She came out into the hallway with her hair tied in a careless bun and an old sweater that barely covered her thinness. She was beautiful, real, vulnerable, and at the same time strong as always. She looked at him with surprise, and then with something closer to exhaustion than anger. "What are you doing here?" "I just wanted to talk to you, not to ask for anything," he replied, in a low voice. "Just to look you in the eyes and tell you I was wrong." Emma didn't respond. She looked down but didn't move. Jake, on the other hand, opened the door completely and took a few steps toward Nathan with total naturalness. And before anyone could stop him, he raised his arms to be picked up. Nathan froze. He looked at Emma, seeking permission. She, speechless, barely nodded with a slight movement of her head. Then Nathan crouched down and took the child in his arms. Jake settled against his chest, as if that place already belonged to him, as if he had known him forever. He clung to his neck, rested his head on his shoulder, and sighed. It was in that instant when something changed. It wasn't a word, or a gesture, or a promise. It was a new silence, one that contained tenderness, amazement, and fear at the same time. Emma looked away. She felt her eyes burn, but didn't want to cry. Not in front of him. Not again. "You didn't have to come," she whispered. "Yes, I did," Nathan replied softly. "Not out of pride, for peace, because you made me see things I didn't know existed, because there are realities I never wanted to look at, and you opened my eyes." Emma swallowed. Her voice broke when she spoke. "I don't know if I can trust, neither do I, but I want to try. I want to learn, even if I make mistakes, even if it takes time." Jake babbled something unintelligible and caressed Nathan's face with his wet little hand, and he for the first time smiled without fear, not as a businessman, not as a powerful man, but as someone who finally was beginning to feel. Emma watched him in silence, and although her heart screamed warnings, something inside her was also beginning to surrender. Because sometimes the first step toward love is simply staying. There were no grand speeches, no dramatic reconciliations. After that afternoon when he held Jake in his arms, Nathan didn't ask to come in. He didn't ask, "And now what are we?" He just said goodbye, with a long look, a gentle caress on the child's head, and a "see you soon" that demanded no response. And he kept his word. He didn't disappear, he didn't hide behind his agenda or his walls of power. The next day it was he who appeared at the community center, asking how to collaborate, how to improve the space, how to do something useful. He didn't say it with arrogance, he didn't offer millions or grandiose projects. He asked what was needed, and then simply, he stayed helping. Emma found out through third parties, and although she didn't want to admit it, that did something to her inside, because he wasn't doing it for her. He wasn't buying favors, he was showing up. The following days he brought donations of books, toys, he painted with the children, he arranged chairs, he repaired a broken pipe with his own hands. No one recognized him as the millionaire from Sterling Capital. There he was just Nathan. Little by little, Emma began to lower her guard. She agreed to meet him at the plaza, to share coffee in paper cups, to walk with Jake, who every time he saw him ran to his arms, as if they had always been part of the same story. Nathan, for his part, also changed. He stopped going to the office every day. He began to delegate, to trust others. His employees noticed the change, more calm, less rigidity, as if finally, he allowed himself to live outside of control. One afternoon, Emma found him in her small apartment, helping Jake with a puzzle. They were sitting on the floor, laughing. The air smelled of homemade soup. The evening light entered through the window like a soft promise. She leaned against the doorframe and watched them for a few seconds, without them noticing. And then she understood. Nathan hadn't crossed the line between their worlds with money. He had crossed it on foot, with small acts, with presence, with a transformation that demanded nothing, only offered. That night, when Jake fell asleep on the sofa, Emma and he were left alone. They didn't talk much. It wasn't necessary. "You're not the same," she whispered. "Neither are you," he replied. "And is that good?" Nathan looked at her with tenderness. The first time that word had real meaning on his face. "It's real, and that is already everything I need." Emma smiled, finally without fear, not because it no longer hurt, but because now someone stayed when it hurt. In the next and final block, Nathan makes a definitive decision. He changes the structures of the company and his own life, honoring what he built with Emma. Love now is lived, not idealized. The ending brings the touch of poetic justice and cathartic emotion that closes the story with strength. Some months passed. Winter slowly yielded its place to a warm and luminous spring. The days grew longer, the streets filled with life. And in the offices of Sterling Capital, something had also bloomed, the absence of fear. The company, once rigid and silent, began to open new spaces, literally and symbolically. Nathan had not only changed his way of living, he had also changed his way of leading. One Monday morning, employees found a notice posted at the entrance of the main building. The title, simple but resounding, read, "New maternity room and children's space, starting today, open to all working mothers with children." It was the first center within a private company that offered that type of support in the city. No exceptions, no bureaucracy, just open doors. Emma, who now worked in the internal social welfare area, was one of the project's promoters, not from the shadows, not from shame, but from respect earned with dignity. She no longer hid Jake. She brought him with her some afternoons, and he ran around the offices among smiles and greetings. He was no longer the cleaning lady's son, he was simply Jake, and that for her was a silent victory. Nathan and Emma never announced they were together. They didn't need to. Those who saw them walk side by side, share a look, or simply remain in silence, knew there was something stronger than any contract there. It wasn't a fairy tale. There were difficult days, doubts, memories that hurt. But there was also something that sustained it all, real presence. The kind that isn't demanded or begged or pleaded for. One afternoon, sitting all three in the park where Jake was learning to ride a bicycle, Nathan said something Emma would never forget. "I used to think that loving was losing control. Today I know that loving is trusting even without guarantees." She looked at him. She didn't respond. She just rested her head on his shoulder, and for the first time she didn't think about what she could lose. She thought about what, finally, she was building, because love didn't rescue her. It chose her and honored her, and that was everything she had ever dreamed of. If you believe that love can heal even those who never learn to feel, subscribe and share this story with someone who needs it.